There are few pieces of media in the last 30 years as beloved or influential as Batman the Animated Series. Still regarded by many as the definitive version of Batman, the word masterpiece just may apply. Everything from the gorgeous hand-drawn animation and designs, epic orchestral music, brilliant voice cast, smart and emotional storytelling, in addition to a mature, dark tone, set this show far apart from its peers. I know I'm not the only one who hears Kevin Conroy's voice when reading a Batman comic, or can almost make out the haunting laugh of Mark Hamill's Joker whenever I see a drawing of the Clown Prince of Crime. This series is embedded in my DNA as a fan of The Dark Knight, and I know a lot of you can say the same, but the show is so much more than all that. Tales of redemption, fear, love, loss, and much more connect to us on a basic human level. Wrap that all up in a beautifully gothic cityscape and a cape and cowl, and you get one of the seminal shows of the 1990s and beyond. The recent release of Batman The Adventures Continue carry on the continuity of the series in comic book form and exemplify just how popular it still is, even all these years later. Using the 2018 Blu-ray collection as our guide, this May, we're going to be reviewing the first 31 episodes. That's one video per day, all month long. I'll even talk about some of the extras in that set as it pertains to the episodes we're going to discuss. It's the deep dive I've always wanted to do, so join me as we take a look back at this animation touchstone piece by piece in Batman. We're kicking off Batman with the episode that started it all, On Leather Wings. The villain, Man-Bat, was a very bold choice for the first episode, and producers Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski were trying to set this show apart right away.
We felt that would give us a real good opportunity to explore the darker, more mysterious, more horror movie kind of elements of Batman that had never really been explored before in any kind of film medium.
And he was right. Man-Bat had been a decently well-known character in the comics, but seeing him on screen was a whole different experience, especially with the strong quality of this animation style. Infamously drawn on black paper, this show was unconventional from the start. Many decisions made by the first-time producers broke the norm and ruffled some feathers behind the scenes, but who can argue with the finished product? The tone was set by the opening scene showcasing a police blimp that was meant to display the otherworldly timeliness of this series' design. One of the first voices we hear is indeed Kevin Conroy, but interestingly, it's not as Batman or Bruce Wayne.
Oh, there it is.
There what is?
It looked like bat wings.
Before Batman is ever seen on screen, we're shown a sequence that introduces us to some important players in Gotham's infrastructure. In that one scene, we find out Batman exists, and Detective Harvey Bullock is out to bring him in, but Commissioner Gordon seems less gung-ho on that idea. Mayor Hill and a coin-flipping Harvey Dent also foreshadow coming events in the series. When we are shown Batman for the first time, it's kind of surprisingly not a big deal. He's just sitting at the Batcave computer reading the newspaper and talking to Alfred, who in this episode is played by Clive Revill before Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. replaced him.
My heavens. You mean it wasn't you tossing guards out of windows last night?
Since the show was going to be aired out of order anyway, maybe they thought a big first reveal wasn't necessary. All I know is Batman talking in Bruce Wayne's voice is the creepiest thing in this episode.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
Anyway, we see some gorgeous shots of the Batmobile leaving the cave, and Bruce eventually shows up to investigate the Man-Bat situation. This leads to some stunning visuals in the climax that starts the show off with an impressive bang. This really does play out like an old-fashioned horror film as science and monsters combine to create one of the more unique episodes this show produced. What came first, the man or the bat? Revisit this one and decide for yourself.
I think he likes bats better than people.
I can't imagine.
Christmas with the Joker is the first official appearance of the Clown Prince of Crime in Batman the Animated Series, and it's okay. Coming off On Leather Wings, this one doesn't quite carry the same sense of style and quality that was established in the first episode. It's not bad, just a bit underwhelming when we look at the show as a whole, especially when you take into account what the Joker became in this series. I think Bruce Timm summed it up best when discussing this installment.
I don't think we actually found the true voice of the Joker until about halfway through the series, again with the introduction of the Harley Quinn character, and these early Joker episodes are a little bit, we still hadn't quite figured his character out yet.
I mean, it's still entertaining. Hearing Mark Hamill voice this character will never leave you bored, and he shines in a few scenes.
Personally, I think relatives are a bore, so Batman can have them. If he can find them by midnight.
The plot is pretty standard. Joker will kill a few well-known hostages unless Batman gets there in time. Setting this during Christmas gave us a few nice wintry shots of Gotham and even a recurring gag surrounding It's a Wonderful Life.
You know, I've never seen that. I could never get past the title.
Oh, and this is Robin's first episode as well. I always considered this my go-to representation of Dick Grayson, the older, college-age, former boy wonder, just about to outgrow the bird and embrace the night, as it were. Voiced by Lauren Lester, Robin didn't show up in every episode, which worked really well for the series and felt like a natural progression leading into Batgirl's inclusion and his eventual fallout with Batman. He often is a needed source of levity, keeping Bruce a little more human. While some of his jokes in this episode are a little...
They don't call you Batman for nothing.
That, he's still a welcomed presence, and seeing him with Bruce and Alfred brings a nice family dynamic to our main characters. The atmosphere is built well by the always wonderful Shirley Walker musical score. The Christmas themes incorporated in here are great fun to listen to and a nice juxtaposition to the usual darker Batman music. The final set piece is also classic Joker with a Christmas flair. I love the giant nutcracker fight. It may have been a bit strange to introduce Joker in such a strongly themed episode, plus we don't even really see him wear his usual full purple suit, but it all works well enough, and we do get a few decent bits, including this pretty well timed one toward the finish. It all ends in a familiar position with Batman holding Joker over a vat of chemicals. Overall, a bit of a goofy episode, but it's an important one when you consider the first appearances of some pretty essential characters. And of course, we get to hear about how much Batman smells.
The Batmobile lost the wheel and the Joker got away.
I've always thought the Scarecrow was an underutilized Batman villain. There are some good stories in the comics about him, plus he was a decently big part of Batman Begins, making subsequent cameos in the two preceding films. However, he's never been a main villain in any of the movies, and I think that's a big missed opportunity. The ideas shown off in Nothing to Fear I don't think were anything too groundbreaking with the character at the time, but the template was there, and his shtick works well in his first appearance. Highlighting Bruce's fear that he's letting his father down gave us a peek behind the cowl. It wouldn't be the last or best time Bruce quasi-interacts with his parents on this show, but the minimalistic execution here was fantastic.
Bruce, you have failed me.
Father?
I love how we get to hear secondhand accounts of who Bruce's father was throughout the episode, and it's two very different perspectives on how he'd feel about his son. One comes from good old Alfred, still voiced here by Clive Revill.
I know your father will be proud of you, because I'm so proud of you.
And the other is a former colleague of Thomas who admonishes Bruce's playboy persona.
It's lucky your father didn't live to see what you've done to his good name. He'd have died of shame.
Say, that kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it?
The apple has fallen very far from the tree, Mr. Wayne.
In fact...
It's a giant bat! Get him!
Hey, wait a minute!
What's the matter, Scarecrow? Can't handle your own medicine?
Stay away! Taste of your own medicine, Doctor. Who are you working for?
and even.
Take what you can, then burn the rest. This isn't about money. It's about sending a message.
Okay, that last one is a stretch, but you can see some possible inspiration in Nolan's first Batman film. I'm sure some of these instances happened in the comics as well. The plot of Nothing to Fear isn't much to write home about. Jonathan Crane wants revenge on the university that fired him, so he enacts that revenge as the fear-mongering Scarecrow. This one's more about the characters and Batman's reaction to the fear toxin. There's an exciting climax on a blimp, because this show loves blimps, and it's really well done. It's a solid first episode for one of my personal favorite Bat Baddies.
What hidden terror keeps the Batman awake at night?
I will say, Scarecrow's design changed a lot throughout the show. Bruce Timm and his team admitted it was difficult to find a good design for him.
Almost every time you saw the Scarecrow, he looked different. So I don't think we ever really quite got the Scarecrow right until when we did the new Batman episodes. And we came up with a really, really frightening look for him. So extreme and so creepy.
Scarecrow does look a little unintimidating in his first episode, but the base was there for a great character to expand on. This episode laid more groundwork, gave us a little taste of our main character's familial background, and ended on a great shot of Batman's shadow following Bruce away from his parents' grave. Great stuff. It's also famous for a little phrase you may have heard.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
For me, The Last Laugh is one of the most memorable Joker episodes. This is another more basic plot that follows Joker spreading his laughing gas all over Gotham through a garbage boat. Add a super strong robotic clown, Alfred breaking furniture, and April Fool's Day, and you get a pretty fun romp. It's definitely a lighter episode of Batman, and one that Bruce Timm himself wasn't too keen on making so early on in the show's run.
We felt it was maybe a little bit more like an old-fashioned Super Friends episode where the Joker really didn't have a real strong motivation for what he was doing, and we felt it was kind of lacking some of the more psychological, character-driven elements that we wanted to see in Batman.
I could see what he was saying. This definitely doesn't have that deep, thought-provoking type of storytelling that most of the series is known for, but for my money, this was a fun little episode. It's memorable for me for several different reasons. Firstly, Shirley Walker's theme for the episode and score overall is stellar. It's so different, and showed off that varying types of music can seamlessly blend in with the more recognizable epic stuff. But it also makes installments like this one stand out from the pack a bit. Music is a powerful gateway to memory, and The Last Laugh's theme I can recall without even thinking about it. The visual reasons this episode is so memorable have to do with the garbage boat emitting that thick green cloud of pure odor. It's just such a uniquely weird design and story point that I can't forget the image of. Also, come on, Captain Clown is the best. Since they made it clear he was a robot, Batman got to really kick the crap out of him too, and it's awesome. I love the reveal of the robot head. It's slightly disturbing, but so cool in an almost 1950s sci-fi movie kind of way. He even gets to destroy the clown in one of those garbage crushers. We see the cube and everything, it's great. But the high moment of the episode is definitely Joker's reaction to Batman dismantling his good pal.
You killed Captain Clown. You killed Captain Clown!
Oh, I love that. Additionally, we did get some really well staged and animated shots of people succumbing to the Joker gas. I was pretty impressed by the blocking and camera movement of those sequences. Lastly, the climax is pretty cool. I really like when Batman catches one of Joker's throwing cards, and the set piece of an incinerator made for an exciting last few minutes. Batman swings through fire. How can that not be amazing? We end on yet another final position of Batman holding Joker over a pit of certain doom. Like I said, this is a fun, memorable excursion among the deeper and more serious episodes. With that in mind, I definitely recommend a rewatch. Do it for Captain Clown, man. Do it for Captain Clown. Now we're talking. Pretty Poison is a classic Batman episode. Not only does it introduce Poison Ivy to the series, but it further establishes Harvey Dent and his friendship with Bruce. The story structure is immediately more complex than the first few episodes. We get some very clever cross-cutting near the top of the narrative that shows off great action while introducing Pamela Isley and establishing where Bruce and Harvey's friendship is currently at.
You probably got hung up on business. Bruce runs around with a high-class crowd. But he still manages to get his kicks. There's nothing we don't know about each other.
Who are you?
It was smart to get us emotionally invested in Harvey before his fall to the other side of the coin. We get to know him and how chummy he is with our main character. You can see how much Bruce truly cares for his friend when Harvey's in the hospital from Ivy's kiss.
Fight, Harvey. Fight.
The star of this episode is, of course, Poison Ivy herself. Without really doing too much, she just comes off so intimidating. It's this calm and deadly demeanor that makes this version of the character so special. But she's also unpredictable. Just when you think you know how she'll react to something, Ivy will throw us a curve.
Oh, it's so sad.
That laugh is so unsettling. A lot of the credit goes to Diane Pershing for knowing how to play up Ivy's more disturbing qualities. Those little reminders are important because they show that while she may be calculating, she's still a few leaves short of a full branch. Her motivations drive the plot forward, and dating Harvey Dent to get revenge on him for building a prison over wildflowers might be the most Poison Ivy thing I've ever heard. Her deadly kiss is focused on twice and genuinely creeps me out. The climax in Ivy's greenhouse is what you'd expect. A giant man-eating plant almost consumes Batman as Isley monologues. That may sound formulaic, but it's very effective here. As I go through my rewatch episode by episode, Pretty Poison is without a doubt the best introduction to a villain yet, and her little evil tease at the end promises more quality stuff to come.
We always grow back. Don't we, baby?
As well as Ivy was pulled off in her debut episode, producer Bruce Timm initially had a difficult time designing her and many of the show's female characters.
I was having a hard time, designing the women characters, and they were coming out a little bit too masculine or too stiff. And Lynn Naylor, who excelled in doing real cartoony but, cute and appealing, women characters, so we actually hired her to do a bunch of different character designs for Poison Ivy. Taking, the best of her sketches, I kind of combined them all and kind of came up with the final Poison Ivy model.
Ivy evolved as the series went on, but I couldn't imagine a better introduction for her. I mean, this guy liked her.
Well, I've been talking to my broker, and his recommendation was that,
But what was his broker's recommendation? It's been 28 years and we still don't know! In short, this is a great episode, and you should revisit it. But if for some reason you're not a Poison Ivy fan, you can always just watch it to hear Kevin Conroy voice a French waiter.
Pour madame, l'escargot. Et pour monsieur, Caesar salade.
Thank you, Andre.
The Underdwellers is weird. It's just really weird. The story is intriguing enough. We follow an underground community of kids serving a man called the Sewer King as he has them steal from above ground and even forces them to remain fully silent. When Batman investigates a series of robberies, he's led to the sewers and meets a mute boy named Frog. Seeing that the boy has clearly not been cared for, he takes him to the Batcave and makes Alfred look after him in Wayne Manor. Eventually, they return to the sewers where Batman discovers the community of kids and confronts the Sewer King. So the thing is, I can see this episode actually fitting in really well with this series. Weird is not a bad thing with Batman, but the execution and writing of this idea just didn't come together very well. Tom Ruegger is given story credit for this one, and he's responsible for the story and/or teleplay for a few of my absolute favorite episodes. Jules Dennis and Richard Mueller, who are credited with the teleplay for the Underdwellers, also have the cat and the claw to their name, and we'll get to that, but I don't think you can necessarily blame one person for this one. It seems like a potentially good idea that just never clicked. With that said, let's talk about some of the more bizarre parts of this episode, like how Bruce seems to think he's seen a leprechaun?
Seriously? You don't believe I saw a leprechaun?
Or when he brings Frog back to Wayne Manor, which turns into a gun PSA.
Children and guns do not mix. Ever. It wasn't loaded. But it could have been.
Why does Batman have a room full of guns in his house anyway? I guess it can make sense to keep up appearances as Bruce Wayne, but still, odd choice. He's also just walking around the manor in costume, which again is not implausible, but such a strange thing to see in this capacity. Shall we talk about Batman's interactions with alligators in this episode?
Later.
Wow. He also suplexes and, I'm pretty sure, kills one with his bare hands. Kind of surprising they were able to just throw that one in there, even though they were given so much crap about a fleck of blood once in a while. Anyway, the Sewer King himself may have been a good idea in theory, but...
Hurry, 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 hurry! We are the Underdwellers. We follow the invisible creed. But...
He's a wacky, neurotic pirate? I'm not sure what they were going for with this characterization, but we do know he kind of enslaves kids, and Batman is very mad at him for it. They play up the plight of these children very seriously, and it would fit in perfectly with the tone of a few other episodes, but when you're showing these kids weeping right next to this guy, it's hard to carry over those emotions from minute to minute. The best part of this episode is when Alfred is watching Frog in Wayne Manor. Let me just say, I love Alfred. I'm a big fan of that character. Whenever we can get him involved in more of the story, I'm usually for it. His bits with this kid were actually pretty funny. In any case, if you want to see a truly peculiar episode of this show, The Underdwellers might be for you.
The light. The light.
P.O.V. is the type of episode Batman the Animated Series was made for. It's mysterious, well-written, and expands the world of the show with new locations and characters. You've seen this story template before. We open in the middle of a big event, then afterwards are told the different perspectives on it by each character that was involved. In this case, a bust goes wrong at a warehouse where a local gang is breaking into a safe. Detective Harvey Bullock, Officer Renee Montoya, and the rookie Officer Wilkes all have different accounts in the night as the warehouse was burned down and most of the gangsters got away. The wild card in this scenario is Batman. His involvement is unknown until later in the episode. The trio are chewed out in true stereotypical fashion by their superior in Gotham PD, Lieutenant Hackle, as Commissioner Gordon watches on. From here, we get the three varying views on the night in question. Bullock's angle on the situation of course depicts him as the hero, and I love his embellished narration.
I was closing in when this loud noise tipped him. Must have been Batman.
This is an interesting take on this type of story, because usually you'd see the flashback play out in the way the narrator is describing it, then at the end see how it really happened. But here, we get to see the contradictions play out visually the first time through as the voiceover goes on. Wilkes' overview of the situation is more Batman-centric. This was the first time the rookie had ever seen him in person, and his description of how the Caped Crusader took out a few of the gangsters is really entertaining.
It was incredible. The Batman threw out his hand and sparks flew from his fingertips. The guy tried to bolt, and the Batman just pointed at him. Wham! He drops. It was unbelievable.
That type of almost supernatural view on Batman from a bystander's perspective is always fun to listen to. It was the whole premise of 2008's Gotham Knight, albeit much more exaggerated with what those people thought they saw. Finally, we hear Montoya's version of events, and they're the most straightforward of the three. She's cornered in the burning warehouse when Batman saves her, but we also see what became of him by the end of the night.
He was buried alive.
All three of them are suspended until Hackle makes a decision on who's to blame for the blunder. I believe this is the only appearance of that character, but damn, he was giving Gordon some lip.
Ease up, Lieutenant.
No, you back off, Commissioner. Gordon, this is my investigation, so pipe down or get out.
The three of them turn in their badges and weapons as we follow Montoya riding the train on her way home. This is a small detail, but I loved seeing it. Small things like this go a long way with setting up tone and a wider view of this version of Gotham City. Montoya figures out a key detail to where the gangsters are going to be, and she finds them holding Batman captive. We then get some more great action and atmosphere as the episode hurtles towards an exciting finish. This is the first episode that shines a real spotlight on Renee Montoya, and what a great character she turned out to be. She has a long legacy, including a recent live-action appearance in the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie, but back in 1992's P.O.V, she took center stage in a big way. An interesting note about this episode is that we never see the full face of the gang's leader. They kind of play it up like he's going to be someone important, but that's not the case at all. Also, the driller character in this episode is voiced by Ron Perlman. It actually sort of looks like him too. This is his first, but of course not his last appearance in the series. Everything about P.O.V hits at full force. Absolutely beautiful animation, great story, interesting characters, and a thrilling soundtrack. How could you ask for anything more? I don't hear P.O.V talked about all that much when folks discuss the best this show has to offer, so if you want to see a perhaps underrated episode in the style this show was made for, make sure you check it out.
The investigation is closed.
The Forgotten is one of those masterpieces this series is known for pumping out. What a fascinating, engaging, unique, emotional, and heartfelt story. I love this episode, and it's also one I can still remember clearly from back when I first saw it. The settings and introspective themes attach themselves to my psyche like a smile to the Joker's face. It is brilliant. Bruce Wayne is donating some supplies to the Dock Street rescue mission and finds out some regulars have gone missing. With the police busy, Bruce decides to investigate, but not as Batman. This is the first time we see him go undercover. After letting a few potential captors take themselves out, he's KO'd from behind and wakes up with amnesia in some type of forced labor camp located in the middle of a canyon. He gets to know some of the workers who we find out are among the missing people from the rescue mission. We then get intermittent flashbacks and dreams as Bruce tries to remember who he is and how he got there. Boss Biggs is shown to be the brains and stomach behind the operation, forcing these abducted men to mine for gold ore. As Bruce hears more about his new friends' backgrounds and how they were taken, Alfred is forced to venture out to try and find the missing Wayne. This episode has everything you want and more that you wouldn't necessarily expect. We'll talk about the settings first. We kick things off in Gotham and get some great looking shots of Bruce's alter ego, Gaff Morgan, strolling the streets and looking for trouble. But most of the episode takes place at the labor camp, which we hadn't seen anything like up to this point in the show. That backdrop provides a stellar canvas for the bulk of this story to be painted on. There's not much else like it throughout this whole series. The music in this episode is phenomenal. You're going to hear me say that a lot this month because Shirley Walker was a genius. The Forgotten soundtrack ranges from harmonicas and a deep, brisk tempo to match the Western setting to gorgeously emotional strings and woodwinds that make you feel sorrow, sympathy, and pity in just 1 second of audio. It is magnificent beyond words. Let's talk about those flashbacks and dream sequences, yeah? If you're watching this episode for the first time, the amnesia aspect to the story might not seem needed. The premise is honestly strong enough without it, but once you start seeing these flashes of Bruce's memories trying to break through, it makes everything 10 times better. I mean, look at this. Oh my god! And that's not even the last one. In one of the most purely emotional scenes in the entire series, we see Bruce outside the Dock Street rescue mission as he's mobbed by panhandlers. First, it's just one, then two, and soon he's overwhelmed. We even see him shed a tear. This says everything you need to know about Bruce Wayne's altruistic core in just 25 seconds. One of the tragedies of this man is that despite all his family's money and resources, he can't save everyone. No matter how hard he tries, no matter how much cash he donates, he can never fully rescue his city from the decay festering in its soul. What an incredible little scene tucked inside an already top-notch episode. Oh yeah, there's that too. No big deal. Just a flawless recap of Bruce's inner pain turning into the Dark Knight himself. My love for Alfred is satisfied here as well. The idea of him having to search for Bruce when he turns up missing is just another part to why this episode leaps past many of its peers. I said in my review of the Underdwellers that I can see that type of premise working in this series despite its poor execution. Well, this is that kind of idea brought to its full potential. And wouldn't you know it, Jules Dennis and Richard Mueller, the pair credited with the teleplay to the Underdwellers, co-wrote this episode as well. Maybe that also had something to do with Boyd Kirkland's direction, but in any case, The Forgotten feels like a one-of-a-kind installment of a one-of-a-kind series. I certainly won't be forgetting it anytime soon. This is the 9th installment in the production order of Batman the Animated Series, and the 3rd Joker episode. Be a Clown is pretty good, and highlighted by the creepy set piece of Joker's hideout. Maybe I'm just a sucker for abandoned amusement parks, but it looks great and is used well, especially in the climax. It's not surprising at all that they used Joker so early on, but knowing how great his appearances became a bit down the road, Be a Clown is more of a middling story for Batman's greatest foe. We wouldn't see him again until episode 22, Joker's Favor, which is the introduction of Harley Quinn. This episode's premise surrounds Gotham's Mayor Hill and his son Jordan's birthday party. We find out with more certainty here that Hill is no fan of the Batman.
Do you include Batman in those rotten apples, Mayor?
Absolutely. He and criminals like the Joker are cut from the same cloth.
Joker takes that as an insult and decides to crash the mayor's mansion during Jordan's party. He appears in disguise as Jekyll the Clown and manages to get the attention of the often ignored Jordan while attempting to kill the hoity-toity rich folks who show up to the house. But wouldn't you know it, one of those hoity-toity rich folks is Bruce Wayne himself. After Joker splits before his dynamite candle's big bang, we see that Jordan has tagged along and reveals himself to Jekyll at his amusement park hideout. Jordan wants to become a great magician and was only following the clown's advice.
Step 1, run away. Step 2, find a magician with a great act.
When they find out Jordan is missing and Jekyll the Clown was actually the Joker, Batman tracks them down and not only has to stop his enemy, but convince Jordan the Caped Crusader is not the bad guy his father thinks he is. The title card for Be a Clown is pretty creepy and represents the best part of the episode. The setup with the birthday party is okay, but once we get to the amusement park, things kick up. Joker goes on to keep fooling Jordan into thinking he's Jekyll, and even though he's dressed in Joker's famous suit and hangs out all alone at an abandoned carnival, the kid still buys it. Yeah, Jordan's not the brightest kid, but you feel sympathy for him. We never see his mom, and his dad seems to treat him like a political tool. He's also not a bad egg. When he sees Batman drowning in the water tank, he attempts to free him, even though his father has told him Batman's no good. When Jordan is shown the truth about Jekyll, he runs into the carnival to get away. Here, we get an ominous slow chase that really brings you into the eerie atmosphere.
Oh, Jordan!
That's the best thing I could say about this episode. The ambiance and uneasy undertone were done really well. The visuals were great, and Joker came off more like a threat than in his first 2 appearances. In the climax, we get an exciting roller coaster chase that brought out the full potential of the setting. Joker isn't captured this time, and I like that kind of ending better than him dangling over something with Batman holding his leg. This was an improvement in some ways over the first 2 Joker stories, but I'd still place it behind The Last Laugh and in front of Christmas with the Joker if I were to rank the pre-Harley appearances. If for nothing else, you'll recognize this episode as the origin of one of your favorite Batman gifs. it was probably no coincidence that the first two-parter in this show's production order is about the origin of Two-Face. We had seen Harvey Dent set up in a couple episodes previously, a quick cameo in the show's first installment, On Leather Wings, and a more prominent role in Pretty Poison. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded another few episodes setting him up before we got to Two-Face, but we definitely got enough to know who he is before his fall from grace. Harvey is running for re-election and finally closing in on taking down mob leader Rupert Thorne. However, Dent has recently been losing his temper at friends, enemies, anyone who's gotten in his way. We find out through his therapy sessions that the DA has another personality inside him called Big Bad Harv. This dark side of Dent represents all his repressed anger and aggression that wasn't properly dealt with for his entire life, and he's getting stronger. Thorne eventually finds out about Dent's diagnosis and ends up calling Harvey on election night. He attempts to blackmail the public official for favors from the DA's office if he wants his therapy sessions kept quiet. An accident at the chemical plant results in Harvey sustaining severe damage to his face, and when he sees himself in the mirror, things are never the same again. This is a landmark episode for the series, not only for setting up Two-Face, but for how far the writers were willing to go to show their dedication to character. Harvey is definitely the star of this installment, not Bruce or Batman. It's his story. While you can argue how realistic the split personality explanation is, it works within the confines of the show and is a pretty interesting angle on Two-Face's origin. The dream sequence starts this episode off on a menacing note.
Stop it! Stop it, I said!
It's time, Harvey.
The character has been interpreted in many different ways throughout his nearly 80-year history. While I liked Aaron Eckhart's version in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, the Two-Face in that movie was more of an extension of the Joker's master plan than a self-sufficient villain in his own right. The first time I saw that film, I really thought they were setting up Harvey as the villain for the next movie, but as we know, that wasn't the plan, and we only got a few minutes of Two-Face depravity. His motivations for going bad were well done, obviously, but the Two-Face in Batman the Animated Series feels more like a complete character to me. It's just more of a challenging and engaging origin. But I mean, nothing beats Tommy Lee Jones, right?
Our kind of day.
The last time we saw Harvey, he was dating Poison Ivy, and now he's engaged to a woman named Grace. For what it's worth, I really like this character's positioning in the story. Her concern and pleas for Harvey to get help show that Dent had a lot going for him. We're also again shown how close Bruce and Harvey are. All that makes his descent even more tragic.
Well, Harvey and I go way back. He's a great DA. And an even better friend.
The animation here is top-notch. Several scenes showcase the beautiful movement and designs. That full Two-Face reveal says it all with no words required. Of course, the music does a great job of setting up the tone too, and Two-Face's theme is minimalistic but effective on different levels. We have to mention Richard Mall and his versatile voice acting as both Harvey and Big Bad Harv. His range is very impressive. The emotion he put into his performance also can't be understated.
Let go of me, you rich twit!
Harvey!
Bruce, I'm sorry. I don't know what... Excuse me.
Plus, he's the voice of the Bat-Computer, which has its own moments later on in the show. I think we all know how great this two-parter is. Part 1 is a fantastic setup for what comes in Part 2 and the Two-Face character for the rest of the series. It also features one of my favorite quotes in this whole show.
Harvey, no.
It's a good no. It's one of the best no's. I just love it. The delivery is delectable. Anyway, we'll see you right back here for Two-Face Part 2 next time on Batman. Here we go, Two-Face Part 2. This is the first time we get to hear these words on the show.
Previously on Batman.
The episode takes place quite a while after Part 1. Two-Face is a well-known gangster at this point, hitting several fronts owned by Rupert Thorne in attempt after attempt to embarrass him. While Two-Face's small operation is running well, there's a big part of him that misses Harvey's fiancée, Grace. He eventually decides he wants to meet with her, which could put his location and well-being at risk. Meanwhile, Bruce has been haunted by dreams of his failure to save his friend. His intense guilt has been driving him to find Two-Face since his escape from the hospital. When the former Harvey Dent's location is revealed, it becomes Batman's chance to try to get his old friend to turn back to the light.
Don't bother to adjust the picture. For the next 5 minutes, I'm in control.
The time jump that happens here makes sense in terms of the story pacing and where we end up by the end of the episode, but I can't help but think how interesting it would have been to see Harvey start up his small crime career after leaving that hospital. Just imagine a freshly scarred Harvey Dent meeting with crime bosses or other infamous Gotham figures for the first time. Seeing the logistics of how he amassed his new reputation could have created an even more dramatic situation for the character. However, I know a 3-parter isn't as poetic or feasible. Maybe there's a Batman Adventures comic about it out there though. If you've heard of one, let me know. In any case, what we did get here is great. So great, a certain movie with the same character may have borrowed a few ideas.
The great equalizer. No!
Not saying those scenes directly borrowed from this episode. I'm sure similar visuals are in the comics somewhere, but it is interesting to see the parallels. Anyway, the Two-Face persona is in full swing, but his longing for grace lets us know Harvey is still in there somewhere. The world around this guy even seems to be taunting him about it. Grace is once again used very well in her screen time. She's the anchor. Her scene with Two-Face is emotionally impactful.
You don't ever need to hide from me.
Bruce's guilt over not saving Harvey allows us to once again take a dive into his psyche. The exaggerated dream sequence that Bruce goes through is another stark reminder of how close he holds his true friends and remaining family.
Harvey! Why couldn't you save me?
And of course, it all leads back to what created Batman in the first place. All Bruce's guilt started when he was just a child.
Why couldn't you save us, son?
Now, I don't think that dream sequence was quite on the shocking level of the ones in The Forgotten, but it focuses less on tragedy and more on Bruce's own feelings of culpability. Some of this series' best moments are in our main character's own head. All the allusions to the number 2 in Two-Face's targets start to show a pattern to his attacks, but for most of the episode, we see Bruce still struggling to track him down. Being the great character he is, Alfred provides Wayne with perspective on this matter.
Keep your guard up, sir. Somewhere inside that monster is my old friend.
That may make him even more dangerous.
Overall, I think you'd agree this is a strong and memorable 2-parter. The animation dropped off a bit in the second episode, and the first may have a few more interesting scenes, but back to back, they hold up very well. Two-Face is one of the most complex villains on this show. His friendship with Bruce deepens all their interactions, and we do get more good stuff from this character later on in the series. Despite Dent's turn to darkness, this episode ends on a hopeful note.
Where there's love, there's hope. But a little luck wouldn't hurt.
It's Never Too Late is one of my personal favorite episodes of this whole show. It's not a huge adventure and doesn't feature a one-of-a-kind standoff with any of Batman's well-known villains. No, this is just a great story with developed characters in a tightly paced 22-minute package. Aging Gotham Kingpin Arnold Stromwell is being pushed out of his position as top dog by the younger Rupert Thorne. A gang war has led to the two leaders meeting to discuss terms, but Stromwell is distracted by the disappearance of his only son, Joey. The meeting doesn't end peacefully, and Batman goes on to show Stromwell the error of his ways and the effect his career choice has had on his own family. A local priest also ties into the drama in an unexpected way. This episode's simplicity is also what makes it complex. The story isn't anything too revolutionary. At its bones, it's sort of your standard redemption tale, but the execution is flawless, and the characters become humanized and relatable very quickly. That's one of the strong points of these mini-movies, as the producers would often refer to the episodes as. They introduce characters and conflicts that are often very ambitious to properly cover in a half-hour TV episode, but they usually pull it off. Some of the main characters here are shown for the first time in this episode, and we get who they are and what they're about right away. Batman has a heavy influence throughout, but he's more of a guiding light in a supporting role. He almost fits the bill of a Ghost of Christmas past, present, and future all in one. The style of the show is never lost, as these sequences all remain visually interesting. The flashback scenes and the elements that trigger them are classic visual storytelling. Look at how that train busts through the cloud of steam like a bull seeing red. Transitioning to sepia tone with a bit of a glossy finish made these feel dreamlike in quality, and the emotion attached to them shines through. Even establishing shots like Batman standing among the gargoyles of a Gothic-style church make for a striking image. Speaking of Batman, his fighting style here is perfect, using the shadows, using deception, and making sure Stromwell's meeting with the priest happens without interference. I also love that he just knows the priest character in this episode. It's obvious from their interaction they've met at least a few times before.
That's one soul I wish I could give up on.
I don't believe you'd give up on anyone, Father. Please be there.
The shot of Batman looking to the church at the end is also well-executed mise-en-scène, representing in general that it's never too late for redemption, even for someone with such a dark past as Stromwell.
I started out here.
Selling drugs.
Prove it.
And now you manufacture them.
For the record, I make candy.
Seeing what's truly become of his son starts Stromwell's path to the light, but it's not until his interaction with Father Michael that he really accepts what he has to do.
An empire crumbling, a marriage shattered, a son lost. Sure, you're doing fine.
Through this plan, Batman not only saves a soul, he truly helps the city by taking one of its most infamous drug lords off the streets. And he did it not only without his fists, but with compassion, patience, and understanding. We don't see this version of Batman all that much when it comes to his enemies. Once in a while, he'll show some type of sympathy for a Two-Face or Mr. Freeze, but he rarely spends his time trying to convince aging drug lords to see their own wrongdoings. It's honestly more of a Superman quality that the Dark Knight emanates here, but wrapped in Gotham's bleak environment, with Batman acting as more of the conscience of Stromwell, it works. Check it out for yourself and see if you agree. It may not be my personal #1 best episode, but it's in the conversation, and it's never too late to change my mind. I've Got Batman in My Basement. What a title, right? In addition to being the first appearance of the Penguin in this show, this episode features a giant South American vulture, kids driving the Batmobile, and Batman himself sword-fighting Penguin with a screwdriver. There's much to discuss. Two of Penguin's thugs steal a rare Fabergé egg, and after Batman is attacked by a large vulture, they escape. Two kids named Sherman and Roberta see and follow the out-of-place bird to an abandoned birdseed factory. There, they witness an encounter between Batman and Penguin. The Caped Crusader is knocked out by some weaponized gas, and to save him, the kids hop in the Batmobile and ride off with the KO'd Dark Knight. They end up hiding him in Sherman's basement until they can figure out a way to help heal him. Meanwhile, Penguin and his thugs track down their location, and a battle inside the house ensues. Alright, look. I'm not going to pretend this is one of the greatest episodes of the show. It's not rich in character, visually interesting, or particularly well written, especially when you compare it to some of the even decent episodes of this series. But I like it. I think it's fun. It's a nice break from the constant darkness of the show, and it's okay to change things up once in a while. We still get all those great episodes, this one doesn't affect them in any significant way. If they want to try something different once in a while, I have no problem with that. As long as it's entertaining in some way, it's fine. And I've Got Batman in My Basement, to me, is at least entertaining. In a few different ways. They definitely played Penguin up as a goofier villain in his first appearance here.
Oh, bourgeois. Tearing this place apart could only improve it.
Even though he seems to be designed after the more grotesque Danny DeVito version from Batman Returns, this Penguin definitely doesn't have that same dark edge. He's not eating raw fish or biting anybody's nose until blood squirts out. No, he's commenting on his distaste for Sherman's furniture.
These commoners have such cheap furniture.
That rich, elitist attitude is nothing new for the character, but I am a little surprised they never made an attempt to make this Penguin as deep, tragic, or scary as some of the other big villains this creative team tackled. Birds of a Feather is probably the closest we get to going beneath the surface, but knowing this show, I would have expected a little more. I know a lot of people can get very angry when kids mix in with their dark shows or movies, and sometimes, yes, they can be out of place or just generally distracting. But we know what we're getting pretty quickly in this episode. Even from the title, it seems obvious where we might be going. And Sherman, Roberta, and the bullies aren't amazingly well-drawn characters, but they fill their purpose fine. I know it's hard to think of this as a kid's show, but technically it was. I don't really consider it one myself with all the complex writing and dark tone, but it aired on Fox Kids and had Batman in it. I guess you gotta throw them a bone once in a while. I enjoyed the Batmobile chase with Penguin and his thugs hanging on the roof. It was decently amusing. The kids even end up booby-trapping the house in a Home Alone-style scene that was entertaining enough, and this leads to that screwdriver sword fight scene I mentioned earlier. Setting it in this kid's basement with a Joker wanted poster on the wall is very surreal, but I will admit, this image has stuck with me since I first saw it. I may be guilty of playing with a screwdriver in this fashion when I was younger as well. It's just that bizarre. Nothing beats Sherman introducing his mother to Batman, though.
Mom, I'd like you to meet Batman. Batman, this is my mom.
Ma'am.
And Rob Paulsen voices a character in this episode. Come on.
That bald buzzard gives me the willies.
In conclusion, yes, this is a goofy episode of the show, but in contrast to other subpar episodes, despite any highbrow influences like Oliver Twist, it's the execution that matters. And I've Got Batman in My Basement was a fun little ride, before we got to something much more chilling. See you next time. We've reached the big one, folks. Right smack dab in the middle of Bat-May is the seminal classic, Heart of Ice. When people today talk about Batman the Animated Series, this episode is almost always brought up as its very best. It reinvented a villain and featured character moments throughout this story that aren't just great for animation or television. They're phenomenal scenes that believably convey drama, tragedy, anger, and even a little bit of hope. Across Gotham, a new villain has been stealing parts of high-tech weaponry and leaving a cold trail behind. Batman investigates and discovers the thief, Mr. Freeze, is actually a presumed dead scientist named Dr. Victor Freeze. After the company he worked for, GothCorp, shut down a medical procedure he was trying to save his terminally ill wife with, he's involved in a laboratory accident that leaves him physically altered and seeking revenge on the man who wronged him. There's a lot to talk about here. Let's start with mentioning this is a Daytime Emmy award-winning episode. That's right, it won way back in 1993 for Outstanding Writing in an Animated Program. Now, technically, the whole show won that award, but Heart of Ice was the episode they submitted. This is the first one written by the great Paul Dini, and also the first that Bruce Timm himself directed. Plus, it was the first recording session of one Mark Hamill. He voiced GothCorp CEO Ferris Boyle, and would return later to famously voice the Joker when Tim Curry was recast.
When he came in for the recording, he said, I want to play one of the villains. Who's left? Who haven't you cast yet? We told him that we had already cast the Joker, and he was like, oh, well, if anybody else comes to mind, let me know. Give me a call. We did decide to recast the Joker, and we remembered that Mark was enthusiastic about it and brought him back in. And he was great, and he's been our Joker ever since.
So lots of important firsts are associated with this installment. This take on Mr. Freeze brought him from goofy, obscure baddie to one of the most complex, interesting characters in the Batman canon. In the commentary track, Bruce Timm and Paul Dini discussed their influences and what they were aiming for with this version of the villain.
At that time, Mr. Freeze was, you remembered him as being Otto Preminger from the old Adam West Batman show, where he was kind of silly. I mentioned something about
like an old Boris Karloff Mad Scientist movie. The idea that, he'd been stuck in some kind of cryogenic accident and considers himself dead to all emotions.
And I remember us also thinking about the old Vincent Price movie, Dr. Phibes.
Michael Ansara iconically voiced Freeze for all his appearances in the DCAU. His work in Heart of Ice has become legendary, but originally, Bruce Timm was thinking about a few different actors for the role.
And we gave her a huge long laundry list of different people we thought might play Mr. Freeze, everybody from Anthony Zerbe to Anthony Hopkins. Like we were going to get anywhere near Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
Andrea was the one who mentioned Michael Ansara. He didn't jump to my mind immediately as being right for Mr. Freeze. I didn't see him as being like this unemotional guy, but we took a chance and he was great.
I can't imagine anyone else saying these beautiful poetic lines that Paul Dini wrote into the script. The character just came together so well.
To never again walk on a summer's day with a hot wind in your face and a warm hand to hold. I'd kill for that.
When Batman discovers Freeze's origin story and the truth behind his quest for vengeance, it's a very compelling, sympathetic, and heartbreaking scene. It's hard to believe all this character development and atmospheric tension is paced so perfectly, yet crammed into a 22-minute episode. But there's not much of an argument against the fact that it's executed flawlessly with precision and care. The slow moments are left room to breathe, the action feels exciting, you quickly understand the motivations of all involved. It's pretty much the perfect script for the genre. I think in the half-hour format, it has to be in the upper echelon of screenplays that should be studied for pacing, character, dialogue, and a consistent tone. I know I would have gotten a lot more out of it if this was taught in any of my screenwriting courses. In fact, if you do want to learn about multiple aspects that make a good script, I'd suggest finding the transcript online and reading it while watching the episode. When you're able to stop and analyze why certain moments work as well as they do, you can probably pick up on a few tricks. Just a suggestion for any aspiring screenwriters out there. I haven't even mentioned the animation yet. This is just about as pretty as the show looks throughout its entire run. The fluidity of the movements in combination with striking designs and eye-catching frames make the look of this episode both provocative and subtle. The attention to detail is beyond impressive.
Notice Mr. Freeze's glass bubble. We had called for that just to be a simple white outline to indicate his helmet bubble. They took it upon themselves to airbrush every single cell of Mr. Freeze's helmet. If I'm not mistaken, I think Mr. Fukuda, who was one of the co-owners of Spectrum, he personally airbrushed all those cells.
Even the little bits in the background add a sense of lived-in believability to the world around our characters. The music is brought up to another level as well. Mr. Freeze's theme is so understated and melancholy. There's not much evil in there. It's just sorrow and a hint of something beautiful that's been lost. Definitely one of my favorites among the villains. In 1997, Batman and Robin used Mr. Freeze's backstory from this show in an attempt to deepen that character on screen. While we can all look back and laugh at the film either ironically or unironically, I can't help but think it damaged the character in the live-action sense. Such empathetic motivations were wasted on bad ice puns and a cigar-chomping Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Cool party!
I wish they'd give this character another shot in the movies. Take him seriously, use him the right way, and show us how far Mr. Freeze could really go. Batman doesn't have to do much in this episode besides be Batman. Freeze handles all the heavy lifting in terms of character, but Heart of Ice does feature a couple funny Kevin Conroy moments.
Mr. Boyle sent me to fill in. Enjoy yourself at the party with his compliments. Huh? Keys?
Plus, Alfred saves the day. How could this not be perfect?
Knockout gas? Chicken soup.
The only way to fight a cold.
This episode really does speak for itself. There's not a ton else I can say that will do justice to the brilliance that is Heart of Ice. There may be episodes I personally connect with more, but it's undeniable how the impact of this story affected the entire Batman franchise and its fans. It will always be a part of us, somewhere, someplace, in our frozen hearts.
Someplace where a warm hand waits for mine.
The Cat and the Claw is notable for several different reasons. Firstly, it was the debut of Catwoman and Selina Kyle in the series, but more importantly, this was the very first episode ever aired of Batman the Animated Series. In the production order, this two-parter was the 15th and 16th installments respectively, but on September 5th, 1992, The Cat and the Claw Part 1 debuted the series on television. This was followed the next day by On Leather Wings, and Part 2 wouldn't air until 1 week later. Allegedly, they were trying to capitalize on the success of Michelle Pfeiffer's turn as Catwoman in Batman Returns, which had just been released 3 months prior. But how does Part 1 of this story hold up? Batman catches a new thief named Catwoman in the act of stealing a very expensive-looking necklace. She proves to be more of a challenge than he expected, as she's able to escape the Dark Knight's grasp. Catwoman is actually Selina Kyle, a seemingly well-off animal rights activist who crosses paths with Bruce Wayne at a celebrity charity auction for wildlife. As Bruce and Selina get to know each other, Batman and Catwoman continue their encounters in costume. While all this is going on, the organization Selina is fighting against for land rights, Multigon International, is secretly working with a criminal named Red Claw for nefarious purposes. They eventually find out Selina and Catwoman are one and the same as they plot their next move. I think this is mostly an unspectacular episode. They seem to be playing a lot off the relationship Bruce and Selina had in Batman Returns, but since they were likely in production simultaneously, I'm not sure how much they were allowed to get a peek at before that film came out in June of '92. Some of Selina's looks in this episode are definitely reminiscent of Michelle Pfeiffer, and the concurrent budding relationships of Wayne/Kyle and Batman/Catwoman sure seem to be following Returns template. However, we know their relationship in the comics has always been this will they won't they thing, so it could just be that general format they were trying to follow. In terms of execution, their back and forth comes off a bit unintentionally awkward sometimes.
Hey, I'll have to try and trim those claws.
But sometimes when they're out of costume, they have their more, let's call them cuter moments.
You bought a date, and I'm honor-bound and delighted to deliver.
Selina has that similar infatuation with Batman that Black Cat has with Spider-Man over at Marvel.
You should have seen him, Maven. He had the eyes of a lion.
Really? What kind of lions has this lady been seeing? Red Claw I remember well from back in the day, but she's not one of the best villains on the show or anything. Her plan is set up in a scene where they project images behind her. This was actually really well animated, as the projection hugged the contours of her face, creating an almost 3D look. Her organization's big move will be intercepting a train passing through Gotham.
It will be transporting a strain of viral plague from our eastern laboratories.
Talk about a contemporary threat. If you're watching this years later for some reason, I recorded it in May of 2020. Look it up. In terms of other memories that stick out about this episode, Catwoman cutting holes in windows with her claws has always been something I associate with the character, likely because of how much she does it in this show. It's nice to see Batman and Catwoman start their budding romance here, but The Cat and the Claw Part 1 is kind of forgettable. It's not bad, but not very good either. We'll see if things pick up in Part 2. Hopefully there's more of that Waluigi guy.
Ah!
Okay, this is way better than Part 1. Way better. I honestly had mostly forgotten what happened in Part 2 before this rewatch, and it's a big improvement. Continuing their plan from Part 1, Red Claw and her organization attack the train carrying the deadly plague. Batman has been fed information about this plan and attempts to stop them, but fails to do so. Red Claw escapes with a canister of the virus and intends to threaten Gotham with its release. Meanwhile, Selina and Bruce become closer, and Wayne even discovers her identity as Catwoman. When Batman finds out she's infiltrated their secret facility alone, he rushes to help her and faces off with Red Claw, plus her whole team. Setting this different tone at the beginning, we see Batman meet with a mob boss about rumors Red Claw will attack the incoming train. The park is a really nice set piece and gives off an appropriately eerie tone. A small detail in the grand scheme of this episode, but I appreciated it. This may have been one of the first times Batman disappears on someone too.
These are outsiders.
Huh? It's good to see Waluigi made it back for this episode.
Waluigi #1. Take that!
For real though, this train heist is great. It's a thrilling scene with heavy stakes involved. We even get to see Bruce pull out the backglider for the first time, so you know it's serious. Another tidbit is we also see Gordon answer what might be the unofficial bat phone, with Bruce talking to him in the Batman voice on the other end. The car chase with Selina and Bruce is another fast-paced action sequence in an episode that gives us several effective ones. It also ties into the plot and leads to Bruce discovering Selina's identity as Catwoman. I will say our lead's animated chemistry here is a big leap forward from their first episode. The scene with Bruce sort of spilling his feelings to Selina was a believable enough step forward for the characters.
I really care about you. I haven't felt this way in a long, long time.
The climax at the government facility caps off this episode on an exciting note. The pacing is much better here, and there's just more on the line to be invested in. Bruce and Selina's budding romance ties everything together as the heart of the episode, but as usual, it doesn't end perfectly. I'd say The Cat and the Claw didn't really need to be two separate episodes. I understand wanting to give time to introduce the popular Catwoman character, but the first episode seemed to not quite have enough story to fill up the runtime. While part 2 has a lot going on in every scene, including the quieter ones, it still feels like a more well-rounded narrative. Let me know what you guys thought of Catwoman's debut, and I'll see you next time on Batmay.
Shh, go quickly.
This show, man. This show! Before I even get into today's episode, I have to say this. Like a lot of you, I grew up watching this series. Of course I have nostalgic feelings for it. I am attached to it in that way. And while it's great to look back on it from a good old days perspective, my main goal with Batmay is to look at each episode individually with a critical eye. As a fan of Batman, sure, there are certain things we come to expect from that character. But as a bigger fan of good writing, animation, and just overall storytelling, this show is truly in rarefied air. One of the episodes that demonstrates those qualities in that mini-movie kind of way is See No Evil. This could be a great story without Batman, and kind of has been before, even recently. But their spin on it here made for something special. A little girl named Kimberly receives nightly visits and gifts from her imaginary friend named Mojo. The problem is, Mojo isn't so imaginary. When a peculiar robbery happens at the Gotham Jewelers Association convention, Batman chases down the culprit who seems to be invisible. We learn along the way some of an experimental invisibility material was recently stolen from Wayne Tech. Batman then has to put the pieces together to find out who this disappearing man is and what his connection might be to the young Kimberly. I'll give a spoiler warning for this one just in case you want to rewatch the episode yourself to follow along with the story. The identity of the Mojo character is not really a secret, and who he is the basis for the whole episode. They tell us 3 minutes in, but I thought I'd give you the option. Anyway, let's get into the meat of this installment. Who Kimberly thinks of as Mojo is actually her estranged father and ex-con, Lloyd Ventrix. Her mother, Helen, has a restraining order against her ex-husband, and with his family about to move, Lloyd's plan changes to stealing his daughter back before his ex-wife ever finds out she's gone. Lloyd is mostly played up as a sleazebag and creepy menace to Batman in this episode, but like so many of the antagonists on this show, he has his reasons for doing what he's doing. They don't justify his actions, but they do make an attempt to show us the gray area of this particular situation. Lloyd's inability to legally see his daughter almost makes him sympathetic. The key word there is almost.
Come on, babe, if you could just let her see me.
She knows you're not supposed to go near her.
Ellen, please, cut me some slack here, will ya? I'll give you anything you want.
His desperation is on full display in that scene. You almost feel sorry for him. But the problem with Lloyd is he'll do anything and hurt anyone to see his daughter. Also, his method for underhandedly doing just that is straight up creepy.
Kimberly. Kimmy.
Ugh. Like I mentioned earlier, this isn't exactly a new concept, but the gimmick of an invisible criminal sneaking around Gotham is an excellent story invention for Batman to fight against. It fits into the world of this show like a glove. Although, for being invisible, you'd think Lloyd would try to be a little more subtle with his robberies.
What the devil?
The Dark Knight had to use creative means to fight this adversary. It really showed us his resilience and intelligence. This is also a good episode if you love a good old-fashioned stealthy Batman scene. However, he is again not the focus of the episode. It's more about building up this villain, his motivations, and the characters he's affecting. This all leads to an outstanding climax, starting at a long closed-down drive-in movie theater. Such an appropriately spooky setting. It looked great on screen, just as all the animation in this episode did. The tone is helped, as always, by a superb score that enhances everything we see. And this really does feel like a movie, not some cheap rush job, a really atmospheric, unnerving, near-horror story with relatable characters and emotions. Throw in the dark guardian presence of Batman, and this becomes yet another episode to put on your rewatch list. It definitely stands out from the pack a bit in terms of the unique mood it creates, but there are some legitimately funny bits as well.
Hey, who locked the bathroom? Who are you? I know you're in here.
I didn't know he could fly, too.
Plus, where that invisible car chase leads makes for an exhilarating finale. This episode is also notable for featuring Lucius Fox in his first appearance in the production order. The writer for this episode and story editor for the series, Martin Pasco, just passed away earlier this month. From this episode alone, you can tell how talented he was. If for nothing else, make sure you See No Evil at least one more time to appreciate his work.
Peekaboo.
The Grey Ghost! Talk about memorable. Tying Adam West into an episode where Batman himself fanboys out over his own childhood hero and inspiration was such a stroke of genius in the writing department. This one has all the elements that make it one of the best in the series. Great voice work, beautiful animation, a peek at Bruce's past, and the music. My goodness, the music. To me, the Grey Ghost theme is almost as memorable as Batman's theme. It really feels like it would fit in an old-time serial, but with a more modern cinematic twist. The whole score just feels like it belongs in a movie theater. It more often than not sounds like that anyway, but here especially. The setup for this episode is very clever. A bombing in Gotham mirrors an old installment of Bruce's favorite childhood show, The Grey Ghost. Since the perpetrator seems to be sticking to the episode's plot and Bruce struggles to remember the details, he ventures out to try and find a copy. The problem is, the original negatives were thought to have burned out of existence years ago, and the only man who may have any remaining footage is Simon Trent, the actor who played the Grey Ghost. Reluctant to get involved, Trent and Batman don't get along at first, but when the attacks continue, they begin working together to find out the identity of the real-life Mad Bomber. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I'm not a fan of the 60s Batman show. I don't like it, never did, still don't. It's just not my thing. There are lighter interpretations of Batman that I am a fan of, like Batman the Brave and the Bold, but that old show, I'm just not into. Having said that, I always liked Adam West. His sometimes zany voice work and persona seemed to embrace his place in pop culture history years after that Batman show went off the air. He did have issues with typecasting for quite a while after playing the Caped Crusader though, and they used that as another aspect of his Simon Trent character in The Grey Ghost. I love how it looks like he was always proud to play the character until it basically destroyed his career. The sense of resentment he has for that role is palpable, and West is legit good voicing him. The novelty is great, but he really did pull off the more serious scenes.
I used to admire what the Grey Ghost stood for.
I'm not the Grey Ghost.
I can see that now.
The Grey Ghost is obviously a nod to the Shadow. A fantastic old pulp character, the Shadow was one of the inspirations for Batman. So you can see how layered this episode is with tributes to versions and influences that came before it. By the way, that '94 Shadow movie with Alec Baldwin and Tim Curry holds up. You should check it out. We learn more about Bruce's background in this episode as well. The scenes of him watching the Grey Ghost as a kid with his dad close by is the perfect reflection of a lot of our own experiences with this very program. And it doesn't even have to be this show specifically, but we can all relate to seeing our heroes on screen from a young age and who we share those experiences with. Whether it be parents, siblings, friends, those kinds of memories hold a special place for all of us. For Bruce, it was where he first learned what a hero could be, and he carried part of that inspiration all the way up through his days as Batman.
Bedtime right after Grey Ghost. Okay, Bruce?
That is indeed Kevin Conroy voicing Thomas Wayne. Bruce's father is tied to that memory of the Grey Ghost, and Batman makes sure to let Simon Trent know it.
As a kid, I used to watch you with my father. The Grey Ghost was my hero.
As you have probably figured out, this is one of my personal favorite episodes, but it's not perfect. Trent dressing up as the Grey Ghost to help Batman doesn't really make much sense. If they gave more of an excuse for it, like he was making some sort of appearance when he saw Batman in trouble, that would have been a little more believable. It's a nitpick, and it's great to have him in the suit, so I don't really count that against the episode. However, the reveal of the Mad Bomber isn't one of the show's better moments.
I love toys. It can carry a bomb. It can hold a city for ransom. It can earn millions. Millions for the little old toy collector. Me.
Bruce Timm voiced and was the model for Ted Dimer, a toy shop owner and memorabilia collector who was hard-pressed for cash. It's great that Timm was able to be involved in the series this way, but considering the quality of what came before, this was a lackluster payoff. They could have easily slotted Toyman in there, but with him being a Superman villain, you probably didn't want to cross that line just yet. Of all the single episodes of the show, I think Beware the Grey Ghost is perhaps the one that deserved a two-parter the most. Building up Trent and the Mad Bomber in the first episode and leading to a more satisfying conclusion would have possibly made this the very best story told across the whole series. But as is, it's still probably in my top 5. Do yourself a favor and take a look back at a piece of Batman history. This is a fun little episode. I like this one. Prophecy of Doom shows off the variance of different themes and stories we see across the series. It's not particularly memorable, but the execution was again handled really well. Seeing Bruce/Batman take on a fraud who claims to see the future while taking rich folks' money made for a kind of odd and quirky but interesting installment of the show. A fortune teller turned cult leader named Nostradamus has lured the wealthy of Gotham into his orbit. His accurate predictions about future events scare them into believing in what he calls the Great Fall, an oncoming economic collapse of Western civilization. To make sure they're taken care of, he convinces them to pool their money together in an account with over $300 million in it. However, Nostradamus is actually a former actor and ex-con named Carl Fowler. With the help of his special effects man Lucas, they forced Nostradamus' prophecies into existence. But when one of those predictions involved the death of Bruce Wayne, Batman takes the case and looks deeper into Nostradamus' charade. The idea of Bruce Wayne infiltrating a cult is a solid story premise. This episode may have handled it in a more exaggerated way, but it is another real-world issue. People being fooled out of their life savings to support an organization that's not on the up and up has been known to happen. Granted, it's a little harder to be quite as invested in who's being ripped off here. The rich of Gotham have more than enough money to survive, even if they lose all the cash Nostradamus had them pool together. If they focus the episode on the downtrodden of Gotham as the ones being swindled, I personally would have been a little more invested.
The vibrations are right for prophecy.
Oh, okay.
Nostradamus and the con he's pulling off make for some fun moments. With his wig off, he even kind of reminds me of Jafar.
We could have finally hit them for all they're worth. Peace to all.
The smoke and mirrors, the voice, the predictions coming true, you gotta hand it to him, it's a pretty solid plan. But they didn't count on Gotham's most famous rich guy being Batman. I like the look of the room where Nostramus's events take place. It was a good location for a climax. All the planets floating around the ceiling made for some interesting visuals. With the life of Bruce's friend Lisa hanging in the balance, they directly interact with that set as things go haywire. Seeing the universe crash down upon Nostramus was an appropriate finale. Speaking of Bruce's friend Lisa, she was voiced here by Heather Locklear.
You know what my inner voice tells me, Nostramos? You've ripped off your last victim!
Aaron Kincaid also voices Lucas in this episode. He returned to play a few other characters later in the show's run, including most notably Killer Croc. Prophecy of Doom is well animated, especially the opening on the boat, and a decent episode if you want to watch a more eccentric situation play out. I'm sure your inner voice will guide you to the right decision. Yes to all. Feet of Clay is one heavy story. Even on this show, it goes pretty far in more than a couple ways. Part 1 does a marvelous job of setting up the characters, situation, and themes. It also excels at world building with beautiful shots of Gotham in different areas from different angles. We see new locations and are introduced to new important players. It just feels more like a living, breathing city in this episode, even more than in a lot of its high-quality predecessors. There are noir elements, there are body horror elements, and the voice acting and dialogue are fantastic at driving home the themes of addiction, body image, the pressures of fame, and more. That's all in just the first episode. At the closed Gotham Island tramway, deep into the night, Lucius Fox is seen dropping off a briefcase to Bruce Wayne, but things take a turn when Wayne double-crosses Fox and a few armed goons threaten to kill him. Batman shows up to save the day, but Bruce Wayne is sought for questioning by police. Meanwhile, movie star Matt Hagen is shown to be hopelessly addicted to a facial cream chemical that restores good looks to his disfigured face. It's revealed he's working for corrupt businessman Roland Daggett. Daggett has him impersonate others with the capabilities of the facial chemical while supplying him with the addictive substance. When he discovers Bruce Wayne is wanted by the cops, Batman does all he can to track down whoever impersonated him in his faux criminal encounter with Lucius Fox. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of layers in this two-parter. There's a ton of story to fit in, but part 1 doesn't ever feel rushed. It takes its time and naturally delivers the information we need to know. Right from the beginning, the episode feels off, but in a good, intentional way. It's like we're seeing Gotham through a different set of eyes. Maybe that has to do with Marv Wolfman writing the teleplay. These were the only 2 episodes he had a hand in collaborating on, and as the creator of Tim Drake, Dick Grayson's Nightwing Identity, and much more, he was a massive influential force in comics for years prior to and after this. Ron Perlman brings a sense of brute desperation to Matt Hagen that is expounded upon later when he's turned into Clayface.
I gotta have more. Now, see? It wore off. Look! I can't fix it anymore!
The old Hollywood tone surrounding him provides excellent direct and indirect metaphors for what can manifest inside us with constant attention, addiction, paranoia, resentment, self-hatred. We see Hagen go through all of it in this first episode. He's made into a very effective, sympathetic character, which this show routinely does very well with its main villains. In his first appearance, Ed Asner nails Roland Daggett's take-no-prisoners attitude. Daggett is truly a revolting human being who doesn't care how many lives he ruins in the achievement of his own underhanded goals.
You needn't bother searching for him. When his supply runs out, he'll come to us.
With Bruce Wayne framed for attempted murder, Batman is shown crossing a few lines in this episode. He scoops up a car with the Batwing and flies it over the city with Raymond Bell, one of the men who attacked Lucius Fox, inside. He even drops the car into the river and threatens him more by dangling his body from hundreds of feet up. Batman was trying to get out of him the name of the man who impersonated Bruce Wayne, but it doesn't exactly go according to plan. When approached by a few police helicopters, really, no blimps, Batman drops Bell into a rooftop pool. Good thing he's so accurate with that Batwing and apparently knew how deep that pool was. This was one of the best times we ever saw Batman off his game. He doesn't have any solid idea of what's going on or who's involved, and even gets himself arrested at the end of the episode. Feet of Clay has one of the most tragic musical themes in all of this series. You can feel the sadness, loss, and sympathy from the first note. They also don't shy away from a few grotesque moments. I mean, they go pretty far with at least one horrific scene. The sequence where Hagen is held on the floor as Daggett's thugs are pouring an exorbitant amount of the facial chemical down the actor's throat is pretty terrifying, and showing us just the shadow made it even more disturbing. We see a tease of the effects that had on Hagen at the end of the episode, which sets us up for an engrossing part 2, and we'll cover all of it next time on Batman. I'm telling you what, people like to talk about how dark this show is, right? Well, there aren't a lot of episodes darker than Feet of Clay Part 2. This is into the depths dark. It's so dense with moments, lines, musical cues, breathtaking animation. Every scene is relentless in its visual and narrative significance. My notes were overflowing with things I had to write down so I could remember to talk about them. Holy hell, is it vicious in its high-quality approach to the story and characters. Marv Wolfman just walked in, dropped this bombshell, and left. Continuing from Part 1, Bruce Wayne is booked at the GCPD but released soon after. Batman immediately goes back on the prowl for Wayne's impersonator as Matt Hagen looks upon his new appearance. The overdose Daggett's minions poured into Hagen's body has transformed him into something he can barely recognize as human. However, he does notice he can shapeshift into other people and objects. With this newfound ability, he goes on the hunt for Daggett and crosses paths with the Batman. Okay, where do I start? Let's go with Clayface first. Matt Hagen is definitely a sympathetic bad guy, but Ron Perlman is so good at being an angry jerk, you almost forget to feel sorry for him a couple times.
You made a comeback before, you can do it again. Comeback? Comeback? From this? I told you I don't need rest. I don't need food. And I don't need you!
A lot of Matt's anger is unfairly directed at his stand-in and best friend, Teddy Lupus. Teddy really cares about Hagen, but all we see is Matt treat him like garbage. Although, it is hard to blame him sometimes, especially with scenes like this.
I'm not an actor anymore. I'm not even a man.
We learn that after the accident that disfigured him, Roland Daggett offered Hagen to be a guinea pig for the first trial of his Renew You facial chemical. The problem was, it turned out to be an addictive substance that causes intense pain if not taken more and more regularly. It also gave Hagen his initial ability to mold his face into other people. Daggett held the chemical over his head as he forced Matt to work for him on some of his criminal schemes. Clayface is on a revenge-fueled mission to pay Daggett back, and his first interaction with Batman was one of the high points of the episode.
What in the name of heaven?
Even though we feel plenty bad for Clayface, he's a frightening adversary for Batman, and uses all his abilities to his advantage in their first fight. Creepy stuff. One of the most eldritch moments in the episode comes when he finally confronts Daggett during his interview on Gotham Insider.
Why don't you
Tell them about me!
Batman in this episode continues to go a bit further than we're used to seeing him in the series. When he threatens the character Germs with a jar of crimson fever in the hospital's infectious disease specimen lab, it's one of his most intimidating scenes.
You're crazy! Last chance. Talk!
Now, they make sure to show us it was really just seawater in that jar, but in these two episodes, Batman really stepped up his interrogation game. That Germs character also turned out to be ahead of the curve.
All these viruses and bacteria, I could be infected.
When he finds out who Clayface really is, Batman thinks up a clever way to defeat him. But like the hero he is, the Dark Knight again tries to appeal to the person inside his enemy.
You can play those roles again, Hagen. Let me help you find a cure.
All that awesome dialogue is great, but where's my Batman janitor Funko Pop? Not discounting the heavily emotionally effective score to this episode, the real star of Feet of Clay Part 2 is the brilliant animation. For Clayface's transformations, they stepped it up to a level rarely seen in this medium, period. We're talking 2D animation here. Look at that! Gorgeous, twisted, and a trademark of this show. Hats off to all who were involved with the visuals. It enhances the story and gives us one of the best scenes in the series.
You know what I'd have given for a death scene like this? Too bad I won't get to read the notices.
Tragic and horrifying at the same time, which also describes the end to this episode. I love a good ominous tease that there might be more to come, and Feet of Clay ends things on a downright scary note.
I wouldn't be surprised if the body they took to the morgue was only a shell. He called it a scene, a death scene so real, it fooled us all.
That ending narration is perfect, and the image it leads to is bone-chilling. As a complete story, Feet of Clay has to be one of the best told narratives in the series. The writing, acting, and visuals worked in sync here like nothing else in the show, especially in Part 2. But boy, is it dark. Go ahead and revisit it or check it out for the first time. Either way, brace yourself for a nightmare that molds to fit your sympathy, vanity, and fear. I've been looking forward to covering this one. It's an important episode written by the one and only Paul Dini. In Joker's favor, we are introduced to the now extremely popular character, Harley Quinn. While it was number 22 in the production order, it's the first Joker episode that aired on TV back in September of 1992. Compared to the 3 Joker appearances that came before, Joker's favor feels much more like the clown we know in relation to Batman the Animated Series. Harley is an important part to his interpretation in this show and added another layer to his character that has become a part of the Joker's overall persona. Charlie Collins is a husband and father who's tired of being kicked around by life in Gotham City, but the day he finally decides to stand up for himself turns out to be the worst mistake of his life. When a car on the highway cuts him off, Charlie curses out the driver, who just so happens to be the Joker. The clown prince of crime follows Charlie off the freeway, and to make up for his mistake, Collins offers to do anything if Joker spares his life. Joker agrees and warns him that one day he'll come a calling to cash in on that favor. 2 years later, the day has come. Joker kept tabs on Charlie's family, who have changed their names and moved to Ohio. Collins is called back to Gotham to play a role in Joker's grand plan to crash the testimonial honoring Police Commissioner James Gordon. We can talk all day long about Harley Quinn and the influences Paul Dini used to create her. Many people already know that Arlene Sorkin and her appearance on Days of Our Lives were heavily involved in Dini's image for the character, so much so that Sorkin herself voiced Quinn in this series. In Joker's favor, it feels like Harley was just always there. She fit in so well with Joker, and their interactions were very natural. Here are the first words she ever spoke.
It is to laugh, huh, Mr. J?
Her involvement in the rest of the episode is classic Harley. We quickly even see her in scenes out of her usual costume and without makeup.
Hey, sugar, you want to read me my rights? Ow! Ow!
Jerk.
This may have been Harley's intro, but she's not the focus of the story. Charlie's arc in this episode was actually really good. His scenes with the Joker work on multiple levels. The scared, confused attitude he spoke with highlighted Mark Hamill's unstable performance.
We can't have people cursing at each other on the freeway. I'm just going to have to teach you some manners.
What?
I don't know! I haven't thought of it yet!
Sometimes his Joker was intimidating, sometimes he was funny, sometimes laughing while simultaneously being violently angry. He would flip back and forth with a ton of energy, and it almost didn't matter what he was saying. It was all in his inflections and tone.
There? Good. Great! I'll be in touch.
By this point, Hamill already had the character down pat and may have not been overdubbing the Tim Curry voiced episodes anymore. But then again, I could be wrong. I don't think it's known for sure how many full episodes Curry recorded before being replaced. I really wish we could just hear a few lines one of these days. Unlikely to happen, but we did hear Curry's laugh for a moment back in the Be a Clown episode. Anyway, Joker bringing Charlie all the way back to Gotham just to open a door was a great little nonsensical payoff. Plus, Charlie sort of going full Joker on Joker toward the end was so good it even made Batman laugh.
Stop! You're crazy! I had a good teacher. Hey, Joker. Gotcha. Oh, very funny.
This episode also had a great goofy theme, paralyzing gas, Joker popping up out of a cake, the first use of a makeshift bat signal, and I believe the first time in the production order we see Batman disappear on Gordon. Joker's Favor is not the very best Joker episode, but the character was starting to hit his stride within the series, and Harley Quinn had a lot to do with that.
A pure, innocent little thing like her, led astray by bad companions.
Vendetta features the introduction of one of Batman's most physically threatening villains, Killer Croc. They almost follow the Jaws model in this episode, teasing Croc's appearance from different angles, until his big reveal 13 minutes in. The tone of this episode was set just right to give us the debut of another monster in Batman's Rogues Gallery. The police are bringing criminal Spider Conway into Gotham to testify against mob boss Rupert Thorne. When the boat he's being brought in on blows up before reaching shore, Conway goes missing. We then find out Detective Harvey Bullock was suspected of taking bribes from Thorne 2 years back, and this gives Batman a reason to look into him as the suspected boat bomber. Soon, another criminal named Joey the Snail is abducted, and this eventually leads Batman deep underwater to discover the person behind these attacks might not even be a person at all. Firstly, Vendetta is a beautiful looking episode. From the rain outside to the heavily shadowed rooms to being above and underneath the ocean's surface, the different locations make this episode feel like its own unique thing within the series. Even little moments like Batman stepping out of the darkness or how they present Killer Croc in certain shots. It's a moody, mysterious undertone that sucks you in right away and lets you know you're in for something a little different. Outside of maybe P.O.V, this is the first time Bullock's clean record as a cop is really brought into question. The character's design and how he talks and sometimes acts can lead one to believe that he fits the description of the classic dirty cop, but he's not. And that's what I always liked about Harvey Bullock. Appearances can be deceiving, and while he's got a rough exterior, he really is one of the good guys. But as one of the good guys, he has more than a couple enemies. This includes Croc. The scene where he's impersonating Bullock is really well done. I mean, it's obviously fishy that Bullock grew a whole foot and has yellow eyes, but they had Robert Costanzo do a more gravelly version of his usual voice.
Joey the Snail, brought in last night on a 605.
Bullock? That you?
Yeah. Now let me see him.
Small details like that make this episode really cool. By the end, there's our first man-to-Batman acknowledgement of respect between the Dark Knight and Bullock.
Why'd you stick your neck out like that to help me?
We may have different ways of enforcing the law, but we both believe in it.
Batman again uses some extreme interrogation techniques, this time with Rupert Thorne.
Did you order Spider Conway blown up?
that loser, he could have talked his head off. No problem.
When Batman starts to figure out what's really going on and who might be behind the kidnappings, he visits the zoo to learn more about crocodiles.
No books or bat computer for this mission, Alfred. There's only one place that can help me now. The local zoo.
At first, he has a tough time finding where Croc is keeping the snail and Conway.
No sign of Conway anywhere, Detective.
Thanks, Bruce Timm. But he eventually tracks them down to his lair, where they have a great first encounter.
They used to call Killer Croc the meanest dude in the Wrestling Federation.
He's right. His match with Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20 was a classic. Batman does some more research on Croc and finds out about his background and medical condition that gives him his gruesome appearance. After drawing him out, they fight one more time in the sewers in a great-looking finale. There are plenty of great images and overall visual sequences in this battle under Gotham, although I was disappointed we didn't get a Sewer King cameo.
But!
I loved when Batman pulled out the red bat shades and tried to blind Croc with a solar flare. This red eyes look also popped up in a few episodes a little further down the line. Vendetta is a solid, enigmatic, gloomy episode, both in story and the visuals. Like Man-Bat, Killer Croc brings a monster movie quality to this installment that I think fans of the show look back on fondly. Fear of Victory is the second Scarecrow episode in the series, and it's alright. There were a few good-looking scenes with one memorable sequence, and it's nice to have a story partially focused on Robin for a change. Also, Tim Curry voices an uncredited character in this episode. It marks the second and final time we heard him on the show after he was replaced as the Joker by Mark Hamill. But that's really just a footnote. The story focuses on a pretty smart plan by the Scarecrow to make a lot of money. Unbeknownst to Batman and the public, Professor Jonathan Crane has escaped Arkham Asylum. He's been traveling to different locations, delivering telegrams to athletes, and betting big money against them. On the telegrams is a form of Crane's fear toxin that can be absorbed through the skin. However, it's only activated by adrenaline, so when these athletes take the court, field, or ice, it kicks in, and they experience their greatest fear. Crane's latest victim is a star quarterback, and just so happens to be Dick Grayson's roommate at GSU. Grayson also touches the telegram, which causes him to freak out later when on patrol with Batman. After finding out Crane is missing from Arkham, Batman and a fearful Robin hunt down Scarecrow to Gotham Stadium in the middle of a big football game. Scarecrow's first episode, Nothing to Fear, had some bigger ideas and better scenes, but Fear of Victory does go a little further in establishing Crane as a more intimidating villain. There is something a little creepy about his disguises when delivering these telegrams too, in a sort of faceless mannequin kind of way. This is Scarecrow's second design, and I think I like it a little bit better than the first. None of them are great or really even good until his redesign in the new Batman adventures, but I am a big fan of the character and his potential, so I can look past a lame costume if the story surrounding him serves him well. I'm pretty sure the Robin-centric episodes got better as the series progressed, and if we're judging this as one of his stories, let's just say it's no Robin's Reckoning. It's cool to see him in college and living his own life, but I think we all know Dick Grayson is a little more interesting than how he's portrayed here. He gets so scared his shirt changes color. Batman's depiction here is pretty standard, but he does end up in one of the funniest situations I've seen him in.
Oh my! Oh my!
Giggity!
There is one great scene in here where Batman passes all his enemies on his way to Scarecrow's cell. I believe this is the first time we've seen Arkham in this capacity, so that's pretty notable. I love how little bits of each character's theme plays as he passes their cells. Very nice touch. When Batman sees that Scarecrow is gone, I love the Joker laugh too. Really quickly, the Tim Curry character in this episode is just known as Leon's henchman. He has a few lines.
Hey, is this some kind of joke?
I never would have guessed that was him. Maybe some of you could tell, but I didn't notice until I heard about it years after first seeing this episode. Maybe it was scheduling conflicts or something, but I'm kind of surprised they never tried to recast Curry in another villain role after he lost out on the Joker. His voice is so distinct, one would think they'd utilize him to a greater extent if they did have access to him. All in all, this episode is okay, honestly kind of skippable except for that sequence in Arkham. And maybe that one other scene.
Oh my! Oh my!
Oh my!
The Clock King has been embedded in my brain since I was a kid. A lot of these episodes are, but I'm kind of surprised at just how memorable this one became. This isn't a main villain episode, it's not really one of the best stories, but there is one aspect to it that makes it significant. The Clock King himself.
Fugit,
Tempo Fugit?
What a name. I know it's based off the Latin phrase for time flies, but it's just fun to hear him say it.
Fugit. Tempo Fugit?
That voice combined with his time gimmick really stuck out to me. For years, I thought the Clock King was an original villain made just for the show, but that's not true. He actually had a long history prior to his appearance here. First as a Green Arrow villain, then showing up in the Batman 66 show, and more. In recent years, versions of this character continue to pop up in Arrow, The Flash, and even the Lego Batman movie. But like other previously known characters, Batman the Animated Series revamped this villain into a unique, schedule-obsessed man who has a bone to pick with Gotham City Mayor Hamilton Hill. Several years before he was mayor, Hamilton Hill would ride the subway to his job as a lawyer. Temple Fugit always sat across from him on the ride, and they got to know each other a little bit. Fugit was the head of a time and motion study company who was on the last appeal of a multi-million-dollar judgment against them. Hill suggests that the tightly wound Fugit loosen up and go into that day's hearing more relaxed. In order to achieve this, he tells him to move his coffee break back 15 minutes and take it easy for a little bit. When Fugit tries this, his case documents are blown around by the wind and he ends up late to his court appearance. The judge finds him in default and upholds the judgment against him, ruining his career. 7 years later, Fugit targets the now Mayor Hill in an attempt at revenge for destroying his life by daring to suggest he go off his schedule. Batman looks into the crimes committed by Fugit and tries to stop him before Gotham's mayor is killed. All of the Clock King's lines are delivered in such a straightforward fashion. It fits the character perfectly, and Alan Rackins did a flawless job voicing him. Toward the end, when he's about to kill the mayor though, his laugh turns pretty maniacal.
The Grim Reaper!
We get to see Fugit at his lowest point when the judge rules against him, and this only increases his already unhealthy fixation with time and precise scheduling. So much so that it turns him into a supervillain worthy of fighting Batman. A lot of people often point out that Batman's best villains are inverses of different parts of his personality. What do we always say about Batman when we match him up in a fight against a Superman or much more powerful character? With enough prep time, Batman can beat anyone. Whether that's true or not, the Dark Knight's smarts and meticulous preparation have been highlighted time and time again. He's always at least one step ahead. The Clock King is the same way. He managed to predict many of Batman's movements and decisions, outsmarting him a few different times here. That makes him a reasonably dangerous and formidable foe. Batman does a lot of detective work in this episode and brings along Alfred for most of it. No Batmobile required, just Alfred driving around with the Caped Crusader in the back seat.
To disable the locks on the vault.
Yes, the time locks. Fugit.
I love Alfred. Those little moments are great. I'm finding out more and more through rewatching this show how special these climaxes are. They always take place at an interesting and/or appropriate location. Now, you can say that about comics in general, but seeing them animated this way in this world makes them exceptional. And this one is no different. I love the clock tower and how it's used in the finale. I got some Back to the Future safety last vibes from this, and it all works very effectively. The Clock King is still at large by the end of this episode, and it really shows how clever he was in fighting Batman. If you have the time, this one is definitely worth a rewatch. With the introduction of Dr. Leslie Tompkins, a direct connection to Bruce's past is explored in a way not seen up until this point in the series. An annual stroll down memory lane is wrapped in an adventure that threatens some of Gotham's most vulnerable and the very place where Batman was born. After Roland Daggett fails to get approval to bulldoze Gotham's historic but infamous Park Row, aka Crime Alley, he sets in motion a plan to blow up the neighborhood and make it look like an accident. With many residents still living in the area, Daggett's plan puts them all in mortal danger. Regardless, the bombs are set to go off at 9 p.m., just as Daggett is speaking at the Gotham Better Business Council's yearly dinner. Meanwhile, Batman travels to Park Row for his annual meeting with Leslie Tompkins, an old friend of Bruce's parents. parents. Leslie discovers Daggett's plan to destroy the whole area and is abducted. At the same time, Batman keeps getting distracted by multiple disturbances. He searches for his old friend and slowly learns more about Daggett's plot. With the time ticking closer to 9 p.m., Batman's efforts to save the old neighborhood may go up in smoke. Leslie Tompkins is a character I don't think gets talked about as much as she should be, excluding Gotham, I guess. But like Alfred, she's always been a parenting presence in Bruce's life. She even knows he's Batman, so the trust goes deep with their relationship. Tompkins brings a heavy presence with her whenever she pops up in an episode of this show. It's almost like a piece of Bruce's parents are still alive whenever we see her. You can tell by how Batman treats her that she's very important to him. Credit to Diana Muldaur for giving her such a warm and caring voice. There's a scene where Batman breaks into Tompkins' apartment and looks for clues to where she might be. He picks up this scrapbook and flips through it. We get loads of deep, rich information over the next 20 seconds. We see who Leslie is as a community leader and how far back her relationship with Bruce goes. The music by Stuart Balcombe across this whole episode is great, but right there, it becomes an even bigger part of the storytelling. Sometimes we don't need to speak to convey a feeling. Sometimes music like this says more than we ever could. Since this is our introduction to Leslie in this series, that short sequence tells us everything we need to know about her. On the night the Waynes were killed, she was the one who comforted Bruce. That picture is worth more than 1,000 words, and we see it again at the end of the episode when Batman and Tompkins visit the very spot where Bruce's parents were gunned down.
Good people lived here once.
Good people still live in Crime Alley.
The literal ticking time bomb that we're shown throughout this episode keeps things moving at an urgent pace. Come to think of it, there's a lot that happens in these 22 minutes. Batman has to put out several figurative fires while also searching for Leslie and trying to get to the bottom of Daggett's misdeeds. Those shorter segments where Batman has to save the day are also very exciting in their own right. With Daggett again escaping justice at the end of the episode, the finish here is bittersweet, just like Bruce's attachment to the Park Row neighborhood. I like how they focused on Batman directly helping the residents there, but also getting across that Crime Alley is never going to be what it was back in the days of Bruce's parents. Leslie would show up a few more times across the series, and whenever she did, we knew we were going to get a rare perspective on Bruce. I'm a big fan of Appointment in Crime Alley, and there's definitely a bunch more I could say, but I think the work speaks for itself. This is a must-watch installment. And if you want to read the comic this episode is directly based on, check out Detective Comics number 457 from March of 1976. If you can track it down online, it's a good companion piece for this story. Now, make sure you come back and join me as we go mad next time on Batman. There are plenty of underutilized Batman villains that were gloriously brought into the spotlight on the animated series. Mr. Freeze, Clayface, you could go on and on. Because of this show, people have a certain reverence for some of those characters that didn't exist before it. Even if they were misused or not used at all in any of the films or bigger animated projects that followed, fans remember them because of how well they were portrayed in this series. One villain that for whatever reason I don't see almost anyone talk about is the Mad Hatter. In my opinion, he is the most underrated of the Dark Knight's foes. I know he popped up in Gotham during that show's run, but I dropped off of watching that series after season 1, so let me know if you liked his portrayal there. Regardless, I really think this version of the character, or one close to it, could hold his own as the main villain in a live-action Batman movie. Admittedly, it would have to be super weird, but personally, I would love to see that one day. I know there are rumors he'll show up in the Matt Reeves Batman movie, but with all the characters already confirmed to be in it as of this recording, it doesn't sound like he'll be one of the main villains. Time will tell on that, I guess. But Mad as a Hatter and another upcoming episode made me a big fan of this guy. Jervis Tetch is a scientist at Wayne Enterprises who specializes in work related to using microchips to enhance the brain's potential. He even has a device that can allow him to control the brains of his lab mice. Tetch is an eccentric man obsessed with Alice in Wonderland and has romantic feelings for his secretary, coincidentally named Alice. When she breaks up with her boyfriend Billy, Jervis decides to try and sweep her off her feet with a night on the town. To impress her, he uses his microchip technology to control the people they interact with, including influencing a couple muggers to jump off Gotham's massive bridge. The next day, he finds out Alice has gotten back together with Billy and they've even gotten engaged. Furious, he unleashes more of his mind control cards and sways additional innocent people under his power. After saving the muggers from jumping off the bridge and discovering their mind control devices, Batman suspects Tetch is involved. Now he has to go through a twisted wonderland of his own to find Alice and stop the Mad Hatter. Frank Parr directed, with Paul Dini writing this one, and it's yet another quality introduction for a character that can easily be dismissed as just goofy and shallow in other incarnations. Of course, there is an obvious element of silliness with the Mad Hatter, but they use that and twist it to fit the overall tone of the show. How the character is first shown to us almost feels like how the Riddler started off in Batman Forever, except, done much better. You can place him in the tragic villain category if you want, but Tetch isn't quite like those characters. We aren't shown anything to directly correlate some tragedy to why Jervis acts the way he acts. We're kind of left to put the pieces together ourselves, and I like that. We definitely sympathize with him as this awkward outsider who can't seem to say the right things, but I think a lot of his pitying character qualities are showcased in his voice.
Well, what could a beautiful girl like her ever see in someone like me? How could I impress her?
He could flip from sad to creepy on a dime, and does so several times in this episode.
Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance?
Almost got a Nicholson Joker vibe in that scene too, with the dancing and music. Tetch was voiced by the late Roddy McDowall, who also played the Bookworm in the '66 show, and even read the novelization of the '89 film for the audiobook.
On its chest, there was a yellow oval that seemed to glow with a light of its own, and in the middle of that oval was the black emblem of a bat. "Don't kill me," one of the crooks pleaded. What are you?" the other one asked. "The Batman."
His unique voice was likely the best thing about this interpretation. He could read any line and give it several possible meanings.
Curiouser and curiouser.
Mind control is also a great storytelling element for Batman to fight against.
Feeding off your brain?
Well, yeah, that doesn't count. I just feel like all the components are there to make him one of the top big baddies. Hopefully in the future, someone can come up with a story to exploit Hatter's full potential. The Alice character in this is a little too, innocent? She sounds like she's 8 years old, but she's gotta be in her 20s, right? I know they wanted to draw allusions to the Alice character from Wonderland, but I just thought that was one of the weaker parts of the story.
Oh, this is getting too weird.
Batman is again dropped into a strange situation, and we get another awesome climax, this time set in Gotham's storybook land. There's an added wrinkle of having to fight innocent people as well. Tetch doesn't have any henchmen. He uses blameless individuals that he's controlling with his headband, so getting around that was a compelling obstacle to see Batman overcome. The rest of the finale in the card maze was great too. Using the Jabberwocky prop was a smart idea. Outside of the main story and characters, Shirley Walker's Mad Hatter theme sets us in the mood for something odd and aberrant. The episode ends on a poignant note from Hatter and ties everything up in a nice melancholy bow. We'll see you next time. Until then, take it away, Batman.
Engage.
Now this, in my opinion, is the Scarecrow used nearly perfectly. Dreams in Darkness once again takes us into Batman's fractured psyche. It features some standout visuals and is structured in a bit of a different way from what we've seen so far. Scarecrow's plan may also look a little familiar. Batman has been locked up in Arkham Asylum. Through a flashback, we see what led to his situation. The Dark Knight was looking into a tip that something bad was going down at the Health Spring Spa. When he arrives, he sees a man attaching some sort of device to the water supply pump. After a scuffle, he removes the device, but a red gas is released into the room. Over the next few hours, Batman slowly starts experiencing hallucinations. While talking to a doctor at the hospital, he's given an antidote but refuses to take it since it will knock him out for 2 whole days. With a strong hunch the Scarecrow is involved and time is of the essence, he heads for Arkham to investigate Crane's whereabouts, but another hallucination causes him to crash before he can get there. Batman did end up at Arkham, but his condition worsened, which caused the doctor there to commit him. Eventually, he finds out Scarecrow is attempting to poison all of Gotham's water supply in the cavern below the asylum. After escaping his room, he walks into the depths below to find Crane. But as Batman's delusions get more intense, it won't be easy to stop the Scarecrow before it's too late. Let's address the obvious first. That whole Scarecrow poisoning the water supply thing is one of the main plot points in Batman Begins. As I've talked about when reviewing Scarecrow's first appearance in this show, the Nolan movies seemingly borrowed a few things from these episodes. Again, I'm sure some of these instances originated in the comics, but there had to be at least a few little things they lifted from here, right? Maybe not, but it is a decently big coincidence that most of those parallels draw back to a single character. Starting this episode out with Batman already in Arkham was a really good hook. Hearing his narration guide us through the flashbacks of how he got there was a welcomed change of pace from the usual structure of these stories. I also appreciate how they tried to explain why the Doctor wanted Batman's mask left on.
His mask is at the root of his delusional fixation. To take it off might plunge him into a catatonic state.
That same Doctor also lists off Batman's villains by their real names.
Jack Napier, Harvey Dent, Pamela Isley. We keep them all under constant watch.
Very interesting that he called Joker Jack Napier there. We know that was his real name in Tim Burton's first Batman film, but I never considered this show's Joker to have that exact same origin. We saw more of his backstory in Mask of the Phantasm and see at least one other example of the Napier name showing up in the animated series, but I think the standard mystery surrounding who the character truly is fits this interpretation better. Joker also pops in here through Batman's hallucinations, though I don't think Mark Hamill was voicing him. Give a listen to these laughs. I've read that Lauren Lester, the voice of Dick Grayson, stepped in to provide those laughs, but there's nothing official to confirm that. Speaking of those hallucinations, they're, pretty disturbing. On top of that, we get another super intense phantasmagoria of Bruce trying to stop his parents' murder. He's running to try and warn them not to go into this tunnel when he starts moving in slow motion. Then, well, take a look for yourself. Jeez, talk about a nightmare. This is yet another example of some of the best Batman-centric stories in this show largely taking place in Bruce Wayne's own mind. Now, as for the Scarecrow, he's not in the episode all that much, really just in the end, but his influence is all over the place. His creep factor definitely raised with each episode he appeared in up to this point. I will say a small gripe I have with the end is that we see Jonathan Crane's full face. Combining the last episode he was in with most of this one, he had almost started to take on a more supernatural persona. Showing him fully out of costume kind of hurt the mystique he was starting to build up. A small complaint, but just my opinion. This is technically the character's third design. However, there's not a dramatic difference from the last time we saw him, really just small adjustments. Although I do love the Grim Reaper timepiece we see him with. Really nice touch. Dreams in Darkness does a great job of showing off more of Bruce's scarred emotional state while building up Scarecrow as an even more imposing threat. On these rewatches, it is my favorite Scarecrow episode thus far, and with the addition of setting the majority of the story in Arkham, this is an installment I definitely recommend taking another look at. But be prepared for some disturbing visuals.
Isn't that why I'm here? Because I'm disturbed.
This is the one where Alfred gets turned into a tree by poison ivy. Ring any bells? Bruce Wayne receives a videotape in the mail from the Eternal Youth Spa, inviting him to spend the weekend at the resort for a rejuvenating experience. Bruce, of course, declines, but when Alfred's, friend, Maggie, barges in and sees the tape, Bruce suggests that she and Alfred go in his place. After Alfred loosens up, they have a great time on their getaway. However, upon returning home, Alfred is acting a little strange. He decorates the Batcave with plants and faints after drinking spa water he brought home with him. While Bruce investigates the formula in the water, Alfred and Maggie have an almost uncontrollable urge to return to the spa, and they leave immediately. Upon seeing the effects the formula has on human plasma, Batman rushes to the spa to find poison ivy has been turning those she deems a danger to plants into humanoid trees. With Alfred and Maggie being among them, Batman must put a stop to Ivy's deranged plot before their metamorphosis is permanent. This is definitely a bit of an oddball episode, but its blend of serenity and horrific imagery made sure that I personally never forgot it. The opening scene is a great tease for what's to come and gives off a frightening vibe that permeates the calm setting. This is another one of those stories that could easily be a movie itself without Batman. Now let's talk about my boy Al. We all know at this point how big of a mark I am for this character, so an episode with him as more of the focus should be amazing, right? Well, honestly, I feel like they kind of dumbed down Alfred in this episode. Compared to how smart he is across most of the series, I don't know how he didn't recognize Poison Ivy at the spa. She was an established villain at this point. Her intro episode, Pretty Poison, even had Alfred doing extensive research on her to help Bruce, so he knows her pretty darn well. She was right in his face. The only difference is she was wearing glasses, and not even big thick ones, these thin little frames that don't even cover her eyes. Maybe I shouldn't be complaining in the same world where Clark Kent hides his Superman identity behind a pair of circular spectacles, but even that's more believable than this. Alfred's kind of girlfriend Maggie also appears in her only episode. There's nothing really interesting about her outside of being an instigator to get the plot going, but boy does she like Alfred. Damn! My man's lips must be made of pure pleasure. Bruce and his alter ego unravel the mystery at hand, and with Alfred directly involved, it was nice to see him so emotionally invested. In his first scene, we get to see another example of him flipping from the fake Bruce Wayne voice to his regular, deeper tone, and it's always so fascinating to hear and see.
Shut it down or you're gone! One of my greedy directors made a deal with a slash and burn outfit in the Amazon.
When Batman confronts Poison Ivy, the reveal of her people tree garden is probably the best part of the episode. Yikes. Appropriately, Batman has one of the angrier deliveries I've heard thus far into the series.
I have the patience of a redwood.
And the convictions of a fanatic.
This was a decent episode outside of Alfred's sudden loss of intelligence. The visuals are terrifying and striking, and the overall plot is something unique enough to fill a whole feature film. Plus, we get to hear Batman yelling for Alfred in the same way Dave does for Alvin.
Alfred? Alfred! Alfred!
We're almost done with Batman, and we've reached my absolute favorite episode of this series. Things can always change as the years go on, but Perchance to Dream, in my opinion, is not only the best episode of this show, it's one of the best Batman stories ever told. I hold it in extremely high regard. When I think back to some of my favorite pieces of Batman media, period, this episode ranks high on the list. Pound for pound, when I compare it to comics like The Killing Joke or The Dark Knight Returns, or live-action movies like The Dark Knight or Batman 89, it's right up there with them. Obviously, 22 minutes isn't enough time to go nearly as deep as those other stories went, but I think getting as much as we did in this limited format makes the legend of this episode even greater. Batman chases down a couple thugs into a warehouse when an unknown device falls on him. He immediately awakens at home in Wayne Manor, but instantly sees that everything is different. His parents are alive, he's engaged to Selina Kyle, and another person is swinging around Gotham as Batman. He seeks help from his friend Dr. Leslie Tompkins, who tells him his memories as the Dark Knight and all the trauma he went through are simply delusions. This Bruce Wayne has led a charmed, leisurely existence, and the thought is his mind is compensating for everything being handed to him his whole life. Bruce does his best to accept this reality, but slowly, things keep popping up to suggest what he's seeing isn't all it's cracked up to be. If you haven't seen this episode, it's your duty as a Batman fan to check it out before I go into my breakdown here. That's right, watch it first before viewing the rest of this video. This is your spoiler warning. Now, if you're still here, you already know the big twist or just totally ignored my warning, but either way, we have to talk about the big reveals in this episode. By the end, we see this fantasy life Bruce has been trapped in is a scheme of the Mad Hatter and his dream machine. The clues were dropped throughout the whole episode, from the Hatter's theme being played under the title card to more subtle musical cues surrounding Bruce's time in the dream world. This all creates a rewarding, rewatchable experience. Even after Batman escapes and wakes up, that scene with Hatter is filled with emotion from both sides, and another example of why he's Batman's most underrated villain.
Why? You, of all people, have the gall to ask me that? You ruined my life!
The vocal performances from everyone involved were outstanding, but Conroy just nailed Bruce's confusion, desperation, and anger. He's the best Batman for a reason, and it's on display in full force in Perchance to Dream.
What if you're wrong? Then I'll see you in your nightmares.
Chills. Conroy himself has said on several occasions that this is his favorite episode, and I think we can see why. He even got to voice Thomas Wayne for a few scenes when Bruce interacts with his parents.
Son, you sound upset. Is something the matter?
This story puts Bruce through the ringer, and in doing so, creates some of the most heartbreaking moments in this series. After talking with Leslie Tompkins, Bruce is convinced that what he thinks is his real life was just a delusion. He actually buys into it for a bit, and his reaction of relief is tragic.
The nightmare is over. You certainly seem like your old self again, Bruce. I've never felt better in my life, sir. My life is a dream, Alfred. The best dream anyone ever had.
Shirley Walker plays this light, happy version of the Batman theme here, and it just rips your heart out. We as the audience know there's something wrong, and this can't be real, but seeing Bruce so happy with what he believes is the perfect life hurts us, because we know this simple, quiet paradise is about to be shattered. When Bruce tries to read the newspaper, the letters are all jumbled. Nothing makes sense. He opens up a few books and the same thing happens. This is the main clue that leads him to realize what's really going on.
It's impossible to read something in a dream.
We see this again at the entrance to the cemetery, and there was another clue dropped earlier when a jewelry store is robbed. Although Wayne Enterprises is clearly spelled out in the company's building, and those initials are legibly on the outside as well. You can pass that off as Bruce being very familiar with his name, or the production team cheated a little bit to try and fool the audience for a while longer. Either way, this was a great method to show how off the world around Bruce really was.
No. You're a lie. It's all a lie.
This may be everything he always wanted, but the mere existence of Batman in this world suggests that even when he wants to accept a better life for himself, the dark truth of who Bruce truly is will never leave him. And eventually, he has no choice but to confront himself. That whole climactic scene in the church tower is one for the ages.
Here I am! I've been waiting for you!
Their battle, with rain and lightning setting the mood and an incredible score highlighting the emotion, hits us from every angle just before the big reveal.
The Mad Hatter.
Ah. Are you the dreamer or merely part of someone's dream?
This isn't some silly storybook!
You have love, wealth, a family, all you ever wanted.
No! I won't live a lie, no matter how attractive you make it.
The only way out is the unthinkable. And airing on Fox Kids, they couldn't show Bruce's dream suicide in full. Instead, they were very clever with what was on screen, and it made for something just as effective. If you want to poke a hole in any part of the episode, maybe you could point out that Mad Hatter could have just killed Batman after he was knocked out, or at least unmasked him. He had already ordered his drones to kill Batman in Mad as a Hatter, and there's not really an explanation given as to why he didn't just take the mask off there.
I was willing to give you whatever life you wanted, just to keep you out of mine!
While the animation here is still pretty good, the Dong Yang Company's efforts aren't quite on par with some of the best-looking installments of the show. It's not exactly a Spectrum or TMS episode, so I guess it's not 100% perfect, but who cares? The main narrative here was on another level. It may be loosely based on Detective Comics number 633 titled Identity Crisis, but that is unconfirmed. This episode's story is credited to Lauren Bright and Michael Reeves, with novelist Joe R. Lansdale writing the teleplay. Transcendent work from all involved who brought this one to life. It's worth noting that Perchance to Dream is derived from Hamlet's To Be or Not To Be soliloquy by William Shakespeare. It's also the name of a Twilight Zone episode, 3 novels, a couple songs, and a stage musical, among other things. But when I hear that phrase, it always makes me think of my favorite episode of one of my favorite shows about one of my very favorite fictional characters. And now, to sleep. Perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
The 31st episode in the production order of Batman the Animated Series is the Cape and Cowl Conspiracy. This one features the first official appearance of the Bat Signal, a new villain, John Rhys Davies, and an ominous tone. The ambiance surrounding this installment creates an atmosphere that feels different from most other episodes. It's a game of one-upsmanship that gives us a few surprising turns along the way. Hosea Wormwood, aka the Interrogator, is a well-known criminal who just stole a collection of bearer bonds meant for humanitarian aid in Eastern Europe. He has a signature way of getting information out of his victims, and in this case, he used quicksand to nearly kill the courier who knew where the bonds were located. Commissioner Gordon gets Batman on the case, and this leads the Dark Knight to Baron Vaclav Yosek, an associate of Wormwood. Through some interrogating of his own, Batman embarrasses the Baron, which leaves Yosek seeking revenge. He employs Wormwood to capture Batman and bring him his cape and cowl. Locked in a battle of wits and death traps, the Caped Crusader and the Interrogator meet several times as Batman's identity hangs in the balance. I like the idea of this villain, an almost Jigsaw type with traps that outsmart his targets. His design doesn't give him any distinct look, which I think could have helped this character stick around beyond just one episode, but he has some Riddler traits, leaving messages in paper and billboard form, but his appearance, voice, and backstory don't set him apart from just being a slick gangster with a gimmick. It's like they wanted to go further with him, but for whatever reason, kept him as a more standard thief. A shame. I think there was some potential there. The locations in this episode are one of the best things about it. A creepy mini golf course, a locomotive-themed amusement park called Train Town, and a wax museum give Batman interesting places to battle the Interrogator. It's a decently good-looking episode with some really nice backgrounds and set pieces. Plus, you can't beat the first appearance of the Bat Signal.
Got a new toy, I see.
They use John Rhys Davies for the first and last time in the show as the Baron character.
I want the Batman's cape and cowl. And I want you to get them for me.
He has a few scenes, but I mean, you couldn't think of anything else better to do with him? It just kind of feels like a waste. The Baron gets humiliated by Batman in front of a full banquet where he's the guest speaker. Batman just swoops in and grabs him in the middle of his speech. Seemed a little out of character, but it doesn't negatively affect the episode. This one is memorable for me because we see Batman unmask. Kind of. Luckily, he had on a blue Iron Fist bandana underneath the cowl. It's a very unique moment to see him like that, which is probably why the image has stuck with me for so long. This story is based on Detective Comics number 450 from August of 1975, called The Cape and Cowl Death Trap. One of the writers on that comic, Elliot S. Maggin, also wrote this episode. I'm going to go into a pretty big spoiler here, so check the episode out if you haven't already. There's your warning. Okay? Ready? Here we go. Near the end, we see that the Baron is actually Batman in disguise.
What will you do with the cape and cowl?
I am going
to wear them.
Obviously, it wasn't him the whole time, but we do see Batman use this tactic in another famous episode. He was trying to get the information from Wormwood on where the stolen bonds were placed. Not his usual way of doing this, but it's a fun enough reveal. The climax takes place in a gym, and they made good use of the equipment for their fight. At the end, we see Batman get one more jab in at Wormwood after he's put in prison. Not a bad episode. I liked it quite a bit, despite some of its untapped potential. And now, my friends, with May at an end, I must bid you adieu.